One of the easiest, fastest, and oldest ways to purchase land is owner financing. It's basically when the seller acts as the mortgage company, you give them a percentage of money down, typically 10%, and then you start paying monthly payments. Now that absolutely seems simple, and it can be, but unfortunately something so simple, if not done correctly, can turn into a nightmare. You see, like buying anything when it comes to real estate, there's a lot of important key factors that everyone should know and understand, because not knowing those could actually lead to owning a piece of property that is basically worthless. There's no value to it, and even worse, it could be useless, where you can't even use it. And listen, the reason why I share all this information is because this is actually stuff that has really happened. Perhaps you buy a piece of land, you always want to know what the land was used for in previous years. Let's just say that it was used for a landfill and you weren't aware of that. Well, the landfill use was fine years ago. Now all of it's been covered up and it looks like a fresh, beautiful piece of land that you could just build anything on. However, the EPA rules have changed, and the change in the Environmental Protection Agency rules will limit what you can and can't do on the property. Now look, regardless of what a homeowner, the property owner, the landowner tells you what they can or can't do with the property, it's still important to always do your due diligence. You hear me say that a lot. Do your homework. Find out what was that property used for. What can it be used for now? Check with the restrictive covenants if there are some. If there's not any, that's great too, but you got to make sure that there's no deed restrictions on the property, because oftentimes there may not be any HOA or restrictive covenants, but it can tell you what you can and can't build on the property. But look, as mentioned, the basic stuff is walk the property and do your due diligence, as you hear me say. But most importantly, if someone tells you that they own the property, and in fact they show you that they in fact own the property, you can't take that as a legal ownership of the property, because there's several things that can be wrong there. Now the reason for this is you always want to verify not only the person owns the property, but do they have the rights of what they call survivorship? Can they actually sell the property? You see, when two people get married, whether they owned the land previously, before getting married, or after getting married, most states are what they call marital interest states. So when you buy a piece of property, what's his becomes hers, and what's hers becomes his. Now, when a person passes away, the properties that they own have to go through a thing called probate or succession. And that's going to really depend on what state you live in. Now, how are you going to know all this? Well, first of all, you just have to take everything to a real estate closing attorney, title company, and have them pull all the restrictive deeds, covenants, and everything on and about the property. They'll see if there's any succession that's been done or needs to be done. Now, if you're buying a property and it pops up that there's a succession that needs to be done, there's probate that needs to be done on this property, because basically the seller doesn't have the right to fully sell the property because they haven't been granted the right of that survivorship yet. It's quite okay. There's nothing wrong with that. It typically takes about 30 to 40 days to get it processed. And many sellers aren't aware that they have to actually do that. It's a matter of about 30 to 45 days, and it costs anywhere from $3,000 to $5,000 depending on where you live, what state you're in, the size of the property. Now, you'll want to have the property surveyed. That's going to be at your expense as a property owner, the buyer of the property. And listen, depends on how large the tract of land is and how wooded it is and how much time they have to spend. We just had a property surveyed last week. It was a 7.5 acre piece of property that was completely wooded. It took all day to survey that property because the property, believe it or not, had never been surveyed before. Walk up this hill here and I'm going to tell you, it had never been surveyed before. You're probably thinking, how is that? Well, it had been somewhat surveyed. You see, this property was old land, like a lot of this land is around our United States of America. It's old property, and sometimes it's surveyed. And when they survey the property, the way they do it now is they physically go out and put rebar. They put a steel bar on all the points of the property. That way anyone can go out there with a metal detector and easily find that rebar that's stuck down into the ground. Now, if you're like me, you're probably thinking, Wayne, how did they do that if they didn't have a survey? And I'll tell you, this is something that was really interesting for me. You see, when I first got my real estate license, I remember them talking about all this nearly 30 years ago. And they said if there's no new up-to-date survey, they simply use things like steel poles, fence post, anything that's basically a marker, and they document it in writing. Now, I don't have an example with me, but it is pretty cool to see. You go 3 paces this way, you go 7 chain links this way, you drop the pin here, the post here, the oak tree here, and you think, oak tree? Yeah. These oak trees, they're hundreds and hundreds of years old. they don't move. However, when you get the survey on the property, you want to make sure that they do a flood elevation certificate. Now listen, most people won't need that, but if you're anywhere around the coastal United States, which is a lot of the United States, California, Oregon, Washington, Texas, Mississippi, Florida, South Carolina, you get it, right? There's a lot of states that are close to that ocean. But you and I both know you don't necessarily have to be around the ocean. You can be around lakes, rivers, streams. That way is Lake Pontchartrain, which is one of the largest lakes in the world. And then you've got all kind of branches of water running off this. So you just never know. A flood elevation certificate is going to show you exactly where the flood elevation is on the property, and it will show you exactly how high that flood elevation stage will be, so you'll know where you can and can't build on that property when it's close to water like that. And yeah, when there's water like that in southern Louisiana, there's alligators. So I tend to walk a little faster when I'm around water. Now, when the seller agrees to sell you the property in owner's terms, it's important to know the property actually doesn't have to be paid for in order for you to build on the property. But it's also important to know what are the terms of the contract to be able to pay the owner back. You see, most of the time when there's owner terms on a property, you're going to pay anywhere from a 2 to a 5 year call. You're going to pay an interest anywhere from 6 to 9%, depending on the seller and you, the buyer, what you're willing to accept and what they're willing to offer. Now, the purpose of a call on a piece of land, it basically lets you know and the sellers know that there's a call on the property, meaning that they're going to call the loan due in full within 2 to 5 years, whatever is agreed upon up front in that offer to purchase that land. And listen, this is why I say owner financing is a fantastic way to purchase a piece of property, because as I mentioned, the property doesn't have to be paid for. They're acting as the mortgage company. So then you can have equity in the property where you put 10, 20, 30% down on the property. You can show that to a banker that you actually have equity in the property. There's an owner with recorded deed, everything that matches that they're financing the property. So it's easy for you to get a loan to build a house based on your plans and the value of the land that you're buying. Now, some people will loan you money on a piece of property, and that's what they're doing basically. They're loaning you money. They're giving you the property. It's put in your name, but you're going to pay them over time, as they call it. They used to call that years ago. Before there were credit cards and anything, you were buying on time. You didn't have the cash or the funds to purchase that all up front. So you put it on a length of term. Now, typically they'll do this over 20 to 30 years on a piece of land, and then that keeps your payments low and also makes a sizable interest profit for the owner selling you the land. Now, once you have the plans to build your house and you've got the land to build your house, you can simply go to a local bank, is what I always advise people, and they will look at the value of the land, look at the plans, and they will appraise that property. They'll give you a value, and they're not just pulling a number out of their head. They're actually taking it to an appraisal. You have to pay for it. It's typically $300 to $400, and the appraiser will look at the land. They'll determine the value of the land based on comparable properties that have sold, and they will give that banker an exact appraised finished value of your new home. Now, after they appraise the property, it's real simple. They're going to start loaning you the money, and they loan that through what they call draws, so you can start the building process. They typically do that within 5 draws on the property. And once the property's completely finished, they'll go out and do another appraisal on the property. And don't worry, you've already paid for all that up front. It's part of the package deal. And once they do that other appraisal on the property, they'll tell you exactly, more than likely you met the value, or if you've had some upgrades that you did, maybe countertops or lighting or cabinets or something like that. But you want to note and document absolutely everything and give everything that you've done in that property. You've got to give that list to that banker so they can give it to the appraiser, so they can justify the appraised value on that property. Now, what's really cool about a construction perm loan is they basically give you a construction loan to pull draws, and then that rolls into permanent financing. What's really nice about that is it rolls into permanent financing and everything is paid off, including the land. So now you have one payment, not just a land payment. The land has been paid for. The seller that sold you the land on owner's terms, they've been paid for because you borrowed money based on the value of the land and the house itself. And now you're getting what they call a construction perm loan. So now it's no different than if you bought a house that was brand new built or pre-existing home and put it on a 30-year mortgage. So let's circle back. This is how it helps you when you buy landowner financing. You bought the land at 8.5% interest, 6% interest, whatever that may be. I tell people it's not the cost of the money, it's the availability of the money. And they are loaning you money because basically it's money that you don't have to come up with. The money's just in the value of the land that they're selling you. So I think you can see how doing owner financing is good for both the seller and the buyer. The seller's making interest. Oftentimes they're making anywhere from $10,000 to $50,000, depending on the price of the land, of course. But it's not just the price of the land. They're making interest on, but they don't have to fool with maintaining anything. Now that buyer's taken over the property, and you as the buyer, after just a couple of years, you built a house on it, got a bank loan, paid that seller off, and now you just have one payment and a beautiful home.